All right, good morning, everyone. Hopefully everybody's doing well. Scott, glad to have you from the early morning out on the West Coast there. See if I can get all this put together right. Am I looking good there, Matt?
Yeah, I can see that. Thanks.
Perfect. I'm Corey Parr with Federated Rural Electric Insurance Exchange. Glad to be with you guys this morning and here to talk a little bit about wildfire liability and mitigation plans and a partnership we have here at Federated with Scott Lindsay and BKI Engineering. This is a issue that we'll talk about here as we go through and talk about in two different senses. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing on the Federated side, and then Scott, being the subject matter expert on our wildfire liability or mitigation plans, I should say, and let him talk a little bit about that. So, Scott, if you want to give a little brief there of you, let's go ahead with that.
10 seconds left for polling.
Give me just a moment. I think Scott may be having some trouble. I'm going to reach out to him.
All right, you want me to just start running into this then?
No, I think I'm okay. Can you hear me?
Oh,
Hey,
yes, we can.
sounds
Thanks.
great.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, I just was muted to allow Corey to do his thing. Yeah, so Scott Lindsay, I'm with BKI Engineering Services. We're based in Battleground, Washington. I worked for Public Power for a long time, was a long-time consultant or employee of the Northwest Public Power Association, which included a lot of co-ops, munis, and PDs from the West. And prior to that, I lobbied in Washington, D.C. and worked a lot with APPA and NRECA on legislation of import to the members. So I've got a long, rooted love for public power, and I'm excited to be able to do it in this capacity. And working on wildfire mitigation plans is just an extension of that history, working with a good co-op community. So that's me.
All right, thanks, Scott, and we're really glad to have you. I tell you, I've got to know Scott here. Unfortunately, it's all been virtually, but we'll get together at some point and get to hang out and do a few things. But just wanted to hit a few things and then see what you guys have for questions as we go through. So we'll roll through what we want to talk a little bit about today. We're going to talk about wildfire outlook and impacts to our cooperatives, what we're seeing there, some of the liability considerations, talk about loss prevention, and then I'm going to kind of hand it off to Scott to kind of run through wildfire mitigation plans and what we've seen out of California over the last couple of years and how it's affected all of us and will continue to affect all of us. He's done some great work. So kind of a case study there with Trinity. He'll talk a little bit about there, and then we'll get into developing your wildfire mitigation plan and go from there. So that said, let's jump into this thing. So Matt, you want to hit that polling question up, and I'll let Scott kind of watch and see what's happening with it.
Yeah, give me just a sec.
Thank you. As he puts this up here, I know you all may think this is a college football poll, but I can tell you it's not. So where did we see these? Where did we see these states fall as far as number of wildfires?
I'll give it about 10 more seconds.
All right, sounds good. I can't see it, so I'm hoping everybody's voting for Alabama like it is football, right?
All right, closing it, and I'll share the results.
All right. So it looks like, yeah, you won on the Alabama vote with 39% there. California comes in second at 25, Idaho third at 21, Texas at 11, and Oregon at 4.
Yeah. So what you want to share with them where we're at on that, Scott? I think that's a little different than what we saw from who did not make the top 10 in number.
You might have been confusing them with the football analogy. Actually, yeah, Idaho is.
I think so.
Yeah. Yep, so Idaho was the. Yep. Exactly right.
All right, that's great. So let's kind of get kicked off there and get everybody in the right frame of mind as we talk a little bit about what we're seeing. And again, I'm going to share with you what we've learned over the last few years, and we'll talk a little more about how it's come to the forefront and is there to stay for us. What you got here now is a map, National Wildfire Outlook map. You know, I spent my career, or began my career at a cooperative in Georgia near Atlanta. So hurricanes were some of the things that we kept an eye on in the area. We watched maps, we saw predictions, things like this. And when you look at this wildfire outlook, and Scott, you jump in here, it's looking at different things. You know, we think about, I don't know if you all have heard recently, the African dust storms have an impact on what we see in hurricanes in the country. Well, what we're looking at here and how this map is put together is we're looking at snowpack in that part of the country. We're looking at monsoon season coming up out of Mexico, how it affects, and they develop based on droughts and the snowpack and the same thing. So we're looking at it a different problem that we have here than we have hurricanes, but they are very similar. We talked a little bit about some of the same things that we look at, or solutions, I should say, for problems are similar here. But that's just kind of what we see from the map perspective. If you're seeing this slide here, then it's pretty obvious that we were running along, and we had issues, obviously, with wildfires. It was on the radar, but you can imagine what happens in 2017 when we see losses go from where they were to basically off the charts. You know, and it's one of those things that it's not going to get any better. It doesn't appear, based on the outlook that we see from our weather outlooks, and then some of the liability issues. So today we want to talk about how can we rein in some of these things that are happening out there. And Scott, jump in at any point where you hear got somewhere you want to add here.
Okay.
One of the things that I wanted to talk about is from the liability standpoint, the potential ignition sources that we have out there as cooperatives. You know, and really, I think we've been doing a good job at this all along. It's just now we're being asked to focus on it from a wildfire situation. We've always thought in that process. You know, when you look at what you're seeing here, hot materials dropping, animals, power lines, transformer malfunctions, high winds, trees falling on lines, lightning strikes, all of these things are potential ignition sources, and all of them can be tied back to the utility. So as we've done for many years, it's crucial that we have those good programs in place to deal with these. You know, from an operation, maintenance, vegetation management. So all these things fall right into the wildfire mitigation plan. The key is that we didn't see it from that sense. We just saw it from operating our system, and then we got to go even further than that when we get to looking at certain things.
Yeah,
So,
and I'll jump in here real quick on that, Corey. So in terms of the stuff that folks are already doing, really, it's just a change in thought process. So think of it in terms of not only the O&M side of it, as Corey said, but also what are the impacts from wildfire. And really, it's kind of a shift in that. And traditionally, you're looking at reliability from the standpoint of just keeping power on for folks. And now it's, well, we got to keep the power on, but we also have to watch out for liability associated with lines going down or sparking fires. And so it's a different thought process than before, but it's still interrelated. And as I'll talk in my part of the presentation, it's comprehensive in terms of how it impacts not only the utility, but the communities as well.
Yeah, that is a great point. You know, I look at it from that sense, Scott, and I'm asked often, well, why do we see better numbers in safety and better numbers in incidents as far as voltage complaints, things like that at Federated? And I think it's due to the focus that are put on those operation and maintenance plans, but they were put on it from that sense, from a safety perspective or from a reliability sense. But you're exactly right. This just adds to that, if you will, and shifts the thought process a little bit. So what we have here is this slide. I don't know if you guys watched the chainsaw, the guys that do the chainsaw art. That's not what we have, although it does look somewhat like Pac-Man there. But this is, as Scott and I were talking about earlier or sometime last week, you know, by the truest definition, would you call this a danger tree? Well, maybe not. But what I would say about this is there's probably a plaintiff's lawyer out there that's just saying, yeah, let me have this one, because although although this may not qualify to the definition of a danger tree, for us in the utility world, it's a danger tree because it hits all those things Scott just mentioned, you know, from your liability, from a safety, and then on top of that, it becomes an ignition source. So one of those things that we really, when somebody says, "Hey, we do window trimming," ooh, I'm a little bit fearful of window trimming, you know, and as co-ops, we've always been one to be focused on our member, but I think, as you said earlier, this becomes more of a community-wide thing. So it's a liability thing for all of us out there. All right, so let's look at some of the allegations that have been levied against us, if you will, from a wildfire perspective. And when I say allegations, these are when someone's looking to say who started this. So we got failure to identify and remove danger hazard trees. In my mind, we just saw one of those. No written vegetation management program. We need to have something written and informal. No regular inspection of lines and trees. Failure to train in-house inspectors. Failure to place lines underground. OCR on one shot or red flag. We haven't done those things. This is getting more toward that shift Scott was talking about earlier, and he'll talk more about. You know, we have things in place to keep us, make us a reliable utility that when we get to a wildfire situation or a high risk wildfire situations, we have to rethink that process. And he'll talk a little more about that. But these are some of the things that we hear from the allegation side of this, and it tends to put us in a position to write things in place. And I want to make clear for one thing, as we talk about these written plans and we talk about what we plan to do, our inspection protocols, we always want to make sure whatever we're writing as far to address these issues are something that we can live with. You know, it's one of those that you want to do a better job than what you anticipated doing. So whatever we write, we want to be overachievers at. So no stretch goals here, if you will. So from a liability standpoint, cooperatives cannot be climate change insurance. You know, we need to work with our legislature, establish some reasonable things to go on there that we can live with, and that's one of the things. I didn't mess that up too bad. Establish reasonable rules for the right of way and certain things that we can follow. Again, as I looked at. As I talked about in the last slide, we cannot be we can't be insurance can't be your risk management tool when we're talking about wildfire liability. As we'll see in some of these damages and awards that we've seen, you know, just as a throw up there, the financial impact over 18 billion in 2017. And economic loss. Campfire in 2018, 16.5. And Scott, you had a number we talked about last week on that one.
Yeah, PGE. So they had 84 counts of involuntary manslaughter with over 100 people killed from the 2018 campfire. One felony count of unlawfully starting a fire. They were ordered to pay a fine of $3.5 million because they started the fire. And because they can't put a corporation in prison, that was the recourse that they had. They just settled a $58 billion bankruptcy settlement, and they're going to pay out around between 11 and 13 billion dollars to the 80,000 people who were impacted by either family loss, business, home because of the fire.
Yeah. So as you guys can see there, that's not feasible. That's not what we can do. Our underwriters for our that we're dealing with as we write higher limits out there for these systems are asking specific questions. They're asking more questions about what are you doing for certain things. I think here at Federated we've done a great job, and we've got a program for our reinsurance that encompasses everyone across the country. So as we look at this, what impacts one would impact everyone. So the key here is these questions that are asked by underwriting and that our staff are going to be out there asking are for good reason, so that we have a good family of cooperatives. We do the right thing. We want to continue to do the right thing. So to keep our tree, if you will, intact for everyone, we've got to make sure that we're asking these questions, and that cooperatives are doing all they can to make sure these wildfire impacts are as minimal as we can. So let's talk a little bit about loss prevention. As I said earlier, it can't be insurance. We've got to look in several different areas, and we'll talk more about from a legislative perspective in a bit. But creating a vegetation management plan is crucial. We have to have one. We have to train our people, and then the third bullet there, executing that plan is probably the most crucial part of it. Making sure that whatever we say we're going to do, whatever our plan dictates that we should do, we're executing that, overachieving to a degree, if you will. We want to make sure we're hitting that mark, documenting those processes, making sure that as you see there, who, what, where, when, whatever's happening, we want to make sure. We got danger trees out there. We want to take action on those. We have beetle kill that comes in and creates a problem. We had the first slide up there. This is mainly a problem out in the Northwest and out west. But we see it in other places here in the Midwest and in the plains, with fires on the ground, things of that nature. So we have to think about it from a different perspective. We've always focused on that reliable energy and a reliable service, and making sure that we do try to please our member. But when we look at our vegetation management plan, it has to be to the point, and it has to have not only keeping the lights on, we've got to look a little wider at this point for this. So, Scott, I think this gets us to is this one of our questions here? Matt, are you sharing a question here?
I'm going to share it in just a sec. And Scott, I believe you're still muted.
Thank you.
All right, sharing it now.
We've got double redundancy here.
It looks like we got a poll open there. I'll let you take that, Scott, and go with that. I can't see it.
Yeah, okay. So we've got, does your state currently have a plan legislating wildfire mitigation plan, a wildfire mitigation plan for electric cooperatives? Just trying to get a baseline and try and determine where folks are at on this. And there should be only 2 states that I'm aware of, California and Utah, that do, but others are likely considering it.
Yeah, I agree. We've worked with a couple different states as they're thinking about this. I think Utah's plan just went into effect, and they needed to have their written plans together by July 1, if I'm not mistaken. But I know that there's other states out there that are focusing on putting together some legislation, and this legislation basically focused on trying to limit our liability when we do the right thing. So
yeah, and we'll touch on at the end of this an appeal for your brethren there at the NRECA to weigh in at the federal level.
Absolutely.
So, okay. All right, good. Well, we got a couple California, Utah folks on the call. So that's good.
All right, we back to me?
Yep.
All right. Well, I'm gonna hand it off there, Scott, and let you do what you do there, and go through this part of the program.
Sounds good. Thanks, Corey. Yeah. So again, I want to reiterate the good relationship that we have with Federated on this. They recognized early on that there is a big liability component to wildfires, and so we typically come at it from an operational or reliability standpoint, but obviously there are litigation and liability components to this, and so it's a good marriage in terms of the partnership that we've got going. So we really appreciate it, and Corey, I've been enjoying chatting with you as we've done our work together too. So look forward to connecting when it's safe to do so. So on the wildfire mitigation plans, the big thing is they're here to stay. So we've already had 2 states that have gone down that path, California and Utah. The objective, I think, from other states is going to be to follow suit and to go down that path in a way that will probably be less stringent than the California model. They typically are more on the aggressive end of what they end up doing in terms of legislation, but California will be a leader in this regard, and others will likely follow. So there's that. So the big elements of the mitigation strategy that impacts utilities is really in 4 different areas. And the big ones are system coordination, equipment upgrades and hardening, vegetation management. And lastly, we've added construction standards because that's all encompassing from the standpoint of the engineering and operations side of the equation. And so really those are the big 4 that we see on the O&M side, but also there's a financial component. So obviously, these are significant amount of investment of dollars and time and energy and effort by staff. And in terms of planning and looking into the future, really you need to think in terms of, okay, this is going to be something that's going to be around for a while. We're going to need to budget for it. We've got to have planning involved with strategic plans, long range plans, construction work plans, anything that involves operation and maintenance of the utility. These are all going to be elements of future planning for financial purposes. Next slide, please.
Hey, Scott, one thing there on that construction
Yeah.
side,
Yeah.
I think about that, and I'm from the East Coast over there, worked at a cooperative there, and I saw us have to change when we became our construction standards changed a little bit as we were focusing on upgrading to a different voltage. Well, I see this, and I'm hoping I'm right, that when you say this construction standards, now we're looking at maybe we're having to shorten a span to account for wire slapping together, things like that. Is that kind of what you're looking at?
Exactly right. Yeah. And then there's also, and I'll get into it, but really there's other technologies out there that utilities can employ. Some are lower cost than others that allow for a higher level of safety on the system that you can basically bring in phases, because
Sure.
all of the folks that we work with are small to mid-sized consumer-owned utilities, and they don't have the resources, nor do they typically have engineering staff that can help advise them on some of this stuff. And so really, yeah, it is going to be a shift in how you look at it, because you do have to plan strategically in terms of what you can afford. You phase your approach, and then you look at available technology that's out there that makes sense. And we really push folks to do that in a phased way, in a smart way. So let's take a look at a case study. So this is Trinity County PUD. They are in Weaverville, California. It's small, it's rural, it's one of kind of the typical type of utility that we would work with. These are the first folks that we did a plan for. So we did it early on during the requirement for the California standard. So all of our plans that we've done since then have been to the California standard, and I'll walk through what that looks like. But ultimately, you can see here that they're in a pretty wildfire incident area, pretty big one, and they were adjacent to Whiskey Town, which I drove through after the fire in a couple of years ago, and it looked like Mars. I mean, everything was gone. It was just charred. It was crazy. And additionally, Trinity Lake is up there, and they had a bunch of photos from City of Redding when I was at a conference, and they showed that boats that weren't even touched by fire were completely taken down to the water. They just melted because of the heat. So it's basically all you could see is that at the water line, there was something there that used to be a boat, and it's barely floating, but it was pretty impressive, and not in a good way. So they, again, this is pretty small utility. They have some issues with Forest Service, not unlike a lot of utilities, and working with federal agencies. And so they had rights-of-way issues. They weren't able to maintain them as nicely as they would like to. They've got a lot of it. And so this was something that had been a constant struggle with them, and that basically it had taken something like this in order to help facilitate some movement there, which they still struggle with to a certain extent, but that's an element of it. And then they're also served in part by PG&E. And when the public safety power shutoff program went into effect, there was little or no planning involved in that from the standpoint of folks down the line, which a lot of other utilities are going to be facing, because they're typically, they're served by some of the big boys, some of those IOUs, and they don't have programs in place to be able to notify them when they're coming down. So on October 9th, they had a PSP, a public safety power shutoff, that PG&E instituted, and 4 of the 8 substations that Trinity had went down. and they didn't have any notification as to when they were going to be back up again. And, you know, obviously we're managing their engineering side, so we had to triage that as well. So it was a crazy time, and that's something that, you know, folks, it's hard to plan for that. So next slide, please. So these are the typical elements of a wildfire mitigation plan. And I won't go into each one of them, but what I will say is that because of the California requirement, because of SB 901, there was rules that were promulgated by the Public Utility Commission that, and this is new, in that you're having a regulatory body at the state level that is having oversight of a consumer-owned utility. And it, of course, it applies to co-ops as well as the PUDs and munis. But in essence, they were required to report to the PUC, the CPUC there. And that's an element of pretty much all of the plans that I'm hearing about at the state level. So just know that that's coming, and that typically we've had the ability to manage our own stuff and be able to run our own programs and run our utilities. But in these instances, this is one where they're claiming jurisdiction on the safety, from a safety angle. Next slide, please. So here's an example of, just to kind of give you an overview of the elements that are included in the actual tactical part of a plan. And you can see veg management is big. You've got your design construction. We talked about standards. The inspection and maintenance, you want a regular schedule with that. Operational practices, you know, how do you bring things back up after down? Situation awareness, response recovery. These are all elements that are going to vary depending on the utility. So there's no one size fits all type of approach for utilities when it comes to wildfire mitigation plans. It's really just a component of what's right for your utility. And so from where we've been approaching it, it's been pretty engineering and operations heavy. That's by nature of the fact that you're working with a lot of technical things that are technical things. That are in aspect, they're all interrelated. And so if there's something that is impacted at one point down the line, it could impact others. And so you need to know what the coordination is like, and then obviously what kind of equipment is available and what you could use or couldn't use. And the plans are always going to be evolving. So they're always going to be transitioning from one, what works to what doesn't. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But really the ultimate goal is for the utilities to limit those sourced ignitions, reduce those to a point to where, if not eliminate them, so that the risk is considerably lower and safety is a lot higher. Next slide, please. Corey.
Yeah, no, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay.
I was just going to
So
say
here's something.
Build on each other, and I thought that last slide was a great visual of that. They all got to be connected, and I think this map really ties it all together, as you're going to talk about here. So.
Thanks, Corey. Yeah, so this is a visual rendering of an area, and this is actually for Montana Utility. This is Missoula Electric Co-op, and this is an actual map of their system that shows where their assets are. So you've got the triangles there with the substations, and it took a lot of work to develop this. And this is going to be an appeal that I make later in the program, that there's a standard, and that there is a concerted effort at the federal and state levels to come up with a standardized map. We've had to develop this on our own, in essence, from about 20 different sources. It's not easy. For utilities that want to do this, it's not going to be something that's easy for them to do. But in terms of what we've got a GIS-based solution here, but we boiled it down into those three areas. So you've got your low, your high, which is the orange, and then the very high risk areas, which is the red. And if you look at it, you can see down there, Clinton towards the bottom, that substation is in a high wildfire zone. So what we'll do is we'll take into account all of the various things on the left there of the slide, which is that geospatial information, population, structures, assets, history, physical access. So we go on site, you just try and look at it and see, hey, are you going to get access to this easily, or is this overgrown, or what's the topography like? Is this on the side of it? Whatever. So these are all elements that play into this. And if you can go to the next slide, that gives you some analytics here. So the analytics show, you can see on that right-hand side, that very high column, it shows you what your assets are that are in that very high zone. And so what we've encouraged folks to do with their plans is to make sure that they're addressing that first tier or that top tier wildfire area with a very high rating to get into those areas first. You'll be able to identify those, and that's the first process, to go through maps there, figure out where those areas are, and they're geotagged, so you know exactly. You'll have points of reference, and you can go out and you can look at assets that are specifically in those zones, and those are the first ones to address, because that's the most important. And it also gives you an idea of what you need to budget for in terms of what costs are going to be for upgrades and all that kind of fun stuff. So next slide, please. So here are some tips that we learned from the Trinity PUD work that we did. So really plan early to the extent that you can start these efforts early on, the better off you'll be. And one thing that surprised us, and this is kind of a neat side effect, but it's a whole utility effort. So it's engineering and operations heavy, but it touches on all aspects. So there's a communications angle you can see on the right-hand side here. This is the website for Trinity PUD as it is today. Prior to this, there was no reference at all anywhere on their website about wildfires. There wasn't anything about preferred setbacks or anything for homeowners, consumers to reference. And now they've got a pretty robust, you can see it's about us, and now it's wildfire preparedness. So it's a big part of their website now. So it's important from that standpoint to do that community involvement. And you'll see that the stakeholders are a key element of that, not only with the first responders and the folks responsible for helping to mitigate the fires when they break out, but also just in a proactive basis working with the communities. One thing that we're really encouraging folks, and again, because we work with small guys that aren't the big boys with unlimited resources, is to be reasonable in your approach. Don't think you're going to do everything in year one and that you need to get all the biggest, baddest equipment that's out there. Just get a plan together, take nice chunks at it, and work your way through it, and you'll be in a good place over time. And again, in terms of the liability component, as long as you've got a plan and you're working the plan, that's going to help in most instances meet that standard for the state to protect you from increased liability. Promote the plan. Yes, you can see that's on the website. Oh yeah, Corey.
God, I was going to say too, I think the one thing that we've learned working with a couple different states on this is crucial too, because you don't want to write a plan, or as you're thinking about the tips for your plan, you may have resources to do certain things. I think it's just a discussion that should happen at operations engineering meetings within these states, so that everybody is comfortable with the kind of plans that they got, kind of get somewhat of a template we can all live with. Because from a liability perspective, and when we think about the legislative perspective, we'll talk about a little bit later, if you go into this and you got these great tips and we're putting stuff together, I think your fourth bullet, be reasonable, and being reasonable, thinking about others that are in the other utilities around you, because we're all going to be measured fairly well, for the most part, the same way. So I think it's great stuff there.
Good. Yeah. And again, those, promote the plan. The easy changes, as Corey said, don't kill yourselves trying to think that you need to get the latest and greatest automated SCADA system. We don't have folks like that. And it's not reasonable to expect that they would. The PUCs, and this is a big pushback, the PUCs aren't accustomed to working with the smaller co-ops and mid-sized co-ops. So they know what the IOUs can bring to the market and that they can spend on projects, but they don't really have a sense or an appreciation, I think, for where the smaller utilities come from. So that's something that I think we're going to need to make sure that as a group and through NRECA's leadership, that we deliver that message at the state level to those folks, and also at the federal level to the extent that they can. So, and obviously budget for the future. I talked about that previously. So we'll move on to the next slide, please.
Yep.
So here are the big lessons learned. Really, you don't realize it when you start this, but a lot of utilities are already doing quite a bit in this space. It's just you have never really categorized it as wildfire mitigation per se, and so really it's a process of capturing and cataloging what you're doing now. And as you go through that process, you'll realize that you actually are doing quite a bit to meet any kind of standard. Right now we're doing it to the California standard. Anything less than that likely is going to be good. As an engineering firm, typically we want to encourage people to exceed the standard just because that's good practice. But in either another case. That's something when you get into this, you're going to discover that quite a bit of what you're doing now is applicable to wildfire mitigation. And then obviously, as you go through that process, you're going to identify those areas of deficiency, right size it. Don't try and go out and do everything at once. Don't go out and try and budget for all the most expensive stuff out there. It's going to be difficult for you to do everything all at once. This is a long-term play, and it's something that's going to be a phased approach over time. And really, you want to build your plan on who, what, when, because it helps inform the cost. It creates accountability, and it puts deadlines and schedules for you. It's a really part of, it's like any kind of planning. You want to make sure you do that. And I touched on this earlier, but you really want to avoid any language that implies PUC jurisdiction. You don't just want to offer it up and give it to them and say, hey, we're going to be PUC jurisdictional. That's one thing with Trinity that they're very sensitive to and did not want to go down that path. So we made sure that anything in the plan did not reference that specifically. So that's something that's going to be a fight here in the future, but you guys need to be aware of it. Also, implement it in reasonable and attainable phases. I talked about that. Track your strategies in your programs. Really, there's a lot of metrics behind these, so you want to know what's working and what isn't. And to the extent that something's working, then you use it. If it isn't, then you get rid of it or you modify it until it works. And then you want to annually update it. So pretty much all plans have this component where you do the metrics check and then you check in, and then on an annual basis, you look at it and review it and try and determine if there's something else you can be doing better. Next slide, please. All right, so just to recap, so these are the big objectives of Wildfire Mitigation Plan. Obviously, it's to protect public safety, it's to minimize that risk to the co-op, it's to prevent and mitigate and recover from wildfires. There's a big community communication element to this, so it's a great opportunity for the co-ops to be able to reach out in communities and do things collaboratively with folks in their community. Obviously, if there's state law that passes, you need to try and be consistent with that. And there's this element of continual improvement, just like any kind of O&M thing that you're doing for your utility. It's the same thing. Now you got to factor in this wildfire mitigation component to it. It's kind of constantly be revisited and refreshed and improved. And next slide, please. All right, so here's the appeal. And actually, this is in developing your plan. So really, we're encouraging folks to get out there and develop their plans. A couple ways to approach it. You can get a copy of one and review it. There's plenty of them that are publicly posted for the co-ops that have already gone down this path. You can draft your own, and looking at that, you can hire a firm like ours. You can join peer groups, and there's been plenty that have happened and that have gotten together in the Northwest. They've got a pretty strong engineering and operations crew that meets on a regular basis in the Northwest, and they've talked a lot about this and come up with some best practices as a group. So it's been pretty beneficial, and we use that as a resource for our plans as well. And just understand they're all going to be different. You can't just pull one off the shelf for one utility and expect it to work for you. And again, know that they're engineering and operations heavy, and that the requirements are going to vary by state law. So if you do it to the California standard, the chances are really good that you're going to exceed whatever state you're in, but know that that's overkill for most states. Next slide, please.
Yep. I'll jump in just for 1 second here, Scott, and just say, talk a little bit about our relationship, Federated, and with you guys. When you got some great points here. Our guys are that are in the field have operational and some engineering backgrounds, but we only go so deep. So what our goal here is kind of part of this is we're helping out. We got cooperatives that are sending us plans. We can take a look at it, have our folks here looking at some of them and commenting. And then the great thing about this relationship is Scott and you guys at BKI have done this. You're very in tune with it, so we can say, hey, here is a group that we know does good stuff and has good experience with it. So I know Phil, our CEO, and Scott served on or presented on a panel, have talked to each other many times, and we have members that have used your firm. So it just works out really well that we can say, hey, you guys ask us for help, we're going to take it, but we can only take it to a certain degree. But then we're going to say, hey, get someone else out there to take a look at it.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, in order to understand the need, Federated really brings that, the liability, the risk concern to the forefront in terms of insurance. And so really, Corey and I we officially have a road show now. So we're teaming up, and we've been asked to speak for
That was bad luck,
statewide.
by the way, so.
Yeah, so it'd be more fun if we could do it in person. But in either case, it's official. We're being hit up to speak to folks regularly, because I think in terms of just understanding that risk on the front end and the insurance considerations associated with liability and whatnot, and how it overlays with reliability and safety, that's just a key component to having both of what we represent involved in this. So that's good. So on to a larger entity that has lots of tendrils in DC, NRECA, and so this is I'm hearkening back to my lobbying days. But what I will say is that you guys are a juggernaut when it comes to interfacing with Congress, and now's the time to engage and really want to talk about influencing this process on the front end, and know that there's a potential that you could have some things that are just pushed onto you that would, in my mind, be an unfunded mandate that you wouldn't have the ability to really have a lot of oversight on what you're being asked to do, and they're doing it under safety guise and put you at a disadvantage. So really, the appeal is, work with your trade associations. NRECA obviously is a big player in this space, and then your statewide and your regional trade associations. Make sure that if you've got contacts, which you all do, with the governor's offices, try and get on those wildfire mitigation councils, try and get, an engineering or operations type person involved in some of these groups that are working together. Coordinate with your legislators, inform them early and often, let them know what's going on and what the importance is to the utility, and be aware of attempts to try and make your PUC jurisdictional. Really, that's the big thing to be concerned about here. And really, you really want to lead the discussion with what you're doing now, so that others can see by example what it is that the utility is doing progressively to protect the community. So there's that element. And one thing that I'll leave you with before we get into the takeaways is that in the 20 plus years that I've been working for public power, I have not seen an issue as big a catalyst for collaboration as wildfire. It touches all aspects of the utility. It's communication, it's customer service, it's engineering, it's operations. The board's interested. Everybody's got a hand in this. And on top of that, it goes further than that. And this is one of those issues where there's really a great opportunity for co-ops to further ingrain their touch into their communities and the folks that they work with, and even with government at the state and federal level, to work collaboratively to try and find solutions on wildfire, because it's one issue that touches everybody.
Yeah, Scott, and that's great points. If you all attended Martha's session yesterday with small business folks and one of our co-op members, as they went through not this, but kind of a similar process, and it's all about knowing those people, getting in front of those people, getting information to your statewide, to NRECA, and they've already done some great work with the Bureau of Land Management, trying to get some things on there to cut through some red tape. So NRECA is very engaged. But what I would say as a cooperative, I think you have to be engaged on that local level as well, to get ahead of this, and let's lead the discussion instead of having the discussion put on us. So.
That's right, and the grassroots strength of NRECA is fantastic. So to the extent that you guys engage on this stuff, you can really make a difference on the front end, and you'll see, where California goes, others tend to follow. And obviously, we want to be on the front end and making sure that anything that's done is reasonable and that folks are going to be able to manage. So.
Yep. So I'll kind of hit on these takeaways, and then we'll see if folks have any questions there. When I look at it, NRECA's work and cooperatives work, we had some local co-ops in certain states that really took the bull by the horns and helped out. And I know NRECA would echo that same thought to try to get these things done on a national level as well as on a state level. So we've done some good work on the federal land side of it. We're looking at significant reforms playing out, hopefully in more states, to try to try to limit some of those things if we're doing the right thing. As I've got down there, risk management and insurance, the inadequacy of trying to insure some of these things without some help when you have an unlimited liability situation, which really happened out in California, could go anywhere. So we really have to kind of get ahead on the front end of that, try to put some solutions together, have some reforms in place. If cooperatives utilities are doing the right thing, and we're doing it to a certain level, we can only do, we have a product that's going to at some point have weather issues and different things that are going to happen to it. But if we're doing all the right things and we're doing them to a significant level, an acceptable level, if you will, as we do in everything else that we do, then we need some help on the backside of this thing, and that's where we're trying to get some comprehensive wildfire mitigation plans on tap, and get the legislators take a look at those and say, yeah, if you're doing this, we can, your liability is only limited to a certain degree. But it's crucial that everyone takes on this and has a part in what we do going forward, because it's going to affect, as you said earlier, as Phil has said, if we don't continue to work and keep our reputation where it is at this point, then the products and the ability to have the things that we need to operate our businesses, it becomes more and more difficult to get those. So with that, Scott, I'll leave it up to you if you've got any last moments, and we'll look to see if there's any questions out there, Matt.
Yeah, that really plays to that local control angle, and this has the threat of impeding on that. So we definitely want to be aggressive about getting out front of it to the extent possible.
All right, Matt, I'll turn it back over to you.
Good. We're going to have Venkat try and jump on, and if he's cutting out still, I'll jump in.
Can you pull this sharing down, Matt?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Yeah, hey, can you hear me?
Kind of.
Looks like we're still having trouble. I'll take over the questions.
Perfect.
Okay.
First one is from Bud, actually. Do you have a recommendation for a defensible ROW trimming cycle?
Yeah, I would have to defer to our technical team on that. But yes, we do. And we also have some maps for setbacks as well that we recommend for folks. That's something I can get to you guys and you can circulate.
Okay. I've got another one here. Just a sec. I've seen where our state is considering mandating a plan, fires and other natural disasters, but the gridlock in the state legislature is making it stall. What can co-ops do to help nudge the legislature into action?
All right, there you go from your lobbying days, Scott.
Yeah, again, I think that they lead. I mean, you really have to lead the discussion. And so show what you're doing proactively as a utility to protect your communities and say, this is what we need the legislature to do to support us. And really that's a good place to be from the standpoint of being able to affect change there. Otherwise, you're being reactionary and they're telling you what they're going to do to you. So which state, do we know which state that was from?
No, he's not listed.
Okay. Yeah. So I would just say that's a great opportunity. Get your folks to engage, lead by example.
Cooperatives working cooperatively together to drive the solution for us.
Yep.
Right. I'm not seeing anything else here. If anybody else
Right.
has any questions, go ahead and send them in. I'll give you just a little bit and I'll let you guys know if I see anything come through.
Cool. And while those are coming in, I wanted to add one other thing on the last slide. There was an appeal there. I'd like to kind of add to it a little bit in that one thing that's been very helpful for us in this process is the maps. We've had to spend quite a bit of time trying to cobble together what maps were out there at the state, federal, local level to try and put together these wildfire maps. And that one that I shared is really an amalgamy of about 20 different resources all brought together into one document. And then the export was that analytics sheet, which is really critical to knowing where you start in the process. And so ideally, and this was an appeal I got from my team that does this, they're like, hey, if we could get some kind of national standard or state standard wherein folks are working together to put these maps together. And Corey, you mentioned they have something similar to that for like flooding and whatnot. And yeah, really it's time for us to push for something like that, because it's really a limiting factor when you're trying to plan if you don't have good data. And that's really what we're trying to drive toward.
Great. I'm not seeing any other typed questions come in. If anybody has a live question they would like to ask, you can use the raise hand button now, and I'll look for those. All right, I've got one here. Perrin.
Yeah, thanks for taking my live question here. Hey, thanks for taking my live question. So one of my takeaways from this session is that it's time to get busy. And what I mean by that is it's time to get busy on that local level and probably at the county level as well. And so co-ops have a lot of influence in the community. So my question is, have you seen where other organizations have had that type of influence, be able to kind of pull people together and be that community resource, where I'm thinking like a local business association or a chamber of commerce to help the local community, whether that be local or county, speak with one voice as they try to advance these types of plans?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Corey, and then you can chime in. But that's a great question. And really, that's the nature of this threat, is that it forces the communities to come together and to discuss ways to work together proactively. And so to the extent that the co-op can be the rallying force, which would make sense, that's a great place to put you guys. So yeah, I mean, and the thing that we found with Trinity is that, man, the community involvement angle to it, we had the public comment period on the wildfire mitigation plan, and we didn't have a ton of people show up for it, but the folks that did were like, we had a former forest supervisor there. We had a guy who was a logger. We had a gal who was a wildlife expert. And they all contributed meaningfully to the plan and in positive ways. You know, sometimes you have those open sessions and you're worried that folks are going to poke holes in what you're doing and try and raise litigation issues and whatnot. But really, in that instance, I mean, I was really pleasantly surprised. There were no naysayers. Everyone was trying to contribute positively to the final product. And so I think that that's a great way and a great cause for the co-ops to take this on early and to really drive that and think outside the box. Don't just go to your normal first responder types. Like you mentioned, chambers of commerce are great resource, Rotary, churches, you name it. Everybody is impacted by this, and they're all, surprisingly, this is one of those things that unifies folks in a way that is really kind of a movement in some regards. So yeah, jump on it, take advantage.
Yeah, I would just add in there, when we get an opportunity to lead like this for the benefit of everyone, I think we have to take that opportunity and step into it. Thanks, Perrin. Great question.
Thank you.
And that's the traditional role of co-ops. I mean, come on, you know,
Right.
these are underserved areas where they historically, there wasn't, you know, power or water or other things. And co-ops are like, well, if we don't do it, no one's going to do it. So we got to jump in and do it. And this is just a modern day opportunity to do what you've always been doing.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I haven't seen anything else come in. If you guys are ready to close, I can close for us.
All right. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you both, Scott and Corey. Wonderful session. Everybody, after a break for lunch, Safety Leadership Virtual Summit will resume with additional breakouts. That is 12:45 Eastern. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.